Hello, good afternoon, guys. Are you guys feeling good? Ready for the next session? Okay. Before we start, I understand that you have got your survey form with you. Appreciate if you could submit at the reception area at level 1 and just drop in to that drop-in box. Yeah? And lots of prizes awaits. All right? I was being told that yesterday there are one winner. I think, yeah, there is one winner getting PS4 actually. So, yeah, go for it, yeah? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are having Mr. Vineet Rai for our next speaker in the title of Creating an Entire Ecosystem for Sustainable Positive Impact. Okay, a little bit about Vineet. He is a co-founder and chairman of Intellicap. In a career spanning 2 decades, Vineet's areas of interest have included early stage venture capital, micro enterprises, microfinance investments, and incubations. He also chairs the board of Will Grow, an incubating and funding platform, and IntelliGrow, an Intellicap subsidiary which provides venture debt services to impact enterprises. He serves on the board of Wish Foundation and is an advisor to Tibetan Entrepreneurship Development Initiative. So give round applause to Vineet Rai.
Okay. So, I actually was wondering sitting there whether this headline made any sense to anyone. Didn't make much sense to me. What would one do creating an entire ecosystem for sustainable positive impact has anything to do with a set of people who are trying to build businesses. And so that's what I was thinking. And I was wondering if, if you guys agree with me. Does this actually appeal to you? I think I'll put all of you to sleep in next 1 year. So what I'll try to do is try to make it pretty aligned to what you are trying to do, is how to build businesses. And then I'll put you in my shoes. So I'm a forester by training. I used to live in a forest. My job was to actually cut the forest sustainably and then actually supply the raw material to the paper mill to pulp it and then actually make paper. Sometime when I was 26, 27 years old, I got married and my wife refused to stay in the forest. I applied for every job possible, from a car salesman to everything, but found it very difficult to get a job because nobody wanted to let a guy sell their car or be an assistant to them who has lived in a forest. So with great difficulty, I managed to actually become a research associate in a management institution where I was to sit in a table and type papers. 6 months later, I ran away from there. I got lucky. Government of Gujarat, which is a state in India, was trying to set up India's first incubator. Neither the government nor I knew what an incubator did. This is 97. But because we were both equally incompetent, they chose me and I became the CEO of this incubator. I was 26 years old. I had no clue what I was doing. But my job, which was briefly told to me, was your job is to pick up ideas of farmers in the villages and convert them into businesses. 4 years later, I had actually set up 7 businesses from those ideas of the farmers, all kind of strange businesses. There was a farmer who has used all kind of scrap to develop a 3-wheel tractor. My job was to convert them into a commercial enterprise. And also to file a global patent for it. I realized John Deere used to make 3-wheel tractors in 1942. But the farmer told me, I can actually make a convertible 4-wheel, 3-wheel tractor. That means the same tractor can become 3-wheel and 4-wheel. And to my surprise, nobody has ever done it. So we actually got a US patent on that as well. So long story short, I actually tried to work with farmers, tried to create enterprises. And by 99, 2000, I had come to two bright conclusions. My first conclusion was that, and this is because I was working with farmers, I was largely focused on rural India. That rural India and urban India are evolving very differently. Urban India is where large concentration of bright people is, so all of you want to live in urban settings, not in rural settings. And part of the reason is because both capital and infrastructure always goes to where strong urban centers are. So if capital and talent congregate there, jobs will get created there, opportunities will get created there, and therefore rural India will always struggle. And therefore, the big question in front of me is, how do you take capital and talent to rural India? It's almost like, how do you take water up the hill? So with this bright idea, I went back to my board, which as I said, was a very illustrious board, and I made a presentation to them, and with all my sincerity, I told them that, guys, I do not know why capital and talent do not go to rural India. And that these are the biggest gaps, and we need to solve them. So my board looked at me incredulously and said, even if you go to Silicon Valley, you will hear the same thing. How do you get capital and talent together? So if they can't do it in Silicon Valley, how the hell will you do it here? So forget about all this. Keep doing this three-wheel tractor and tilting bullock cart, whatever you're doing. I was 29 by then. I thought I was a very smart guy. I have already done something that I did not know anything about. So if the board doesn't want to do it, then I will do it myself. So now each one of you are me, 29-year-old. Your life saving is $100. That's essentially what I had. And you wanted to change the world, which is what I set myself out to. You wanted to take capital to rural India. By the way, remember, I'm a forester. And as I was in United Nations, and the moderator actually said, oh, you must be wondering that money rises, money is hanging on the trees. Actually, I did think like that. So the question I'm posing to you is, how the hell do you actually take capital and attract the best of the talent to change the world? And to make it more simple, how the hell do you make poor people rich? When you have $100, no experience, and you know nothing about either entrepreneurship or venture capital. And that was the challenge that I had. Just that I had very little understanding of the enormity of the challenge. And since I was so inexperienced, and you can call me quite dumb, I decided to do it all on my own with the $100 behind me. So the first lesson from my life history is that if you are inexperienced, if you are young, and you do not know, there is a high likelihood you will change the world. Because everybody else with experience knows cannot be done, so will not do it. So the large number of you sitting out here has the potential to do things that most of us fail to do. So we'll start with this. How many of you are going to change the world? Very good. Now, how many of you would like to actually change their position with me and want to actually do it with $100 with no knowledge of doing things? Okay, we have a very brave person here. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll actually try to tell you what I did. Or let me try to do this. I'll actually take you through where we are today. And this is, my situation was 2001, $100, no experience, no manpower, nothing, just one wife to take care of me. And by the way, having a wife is a big achievement if you have only $100 in your pocket. So with that, let me actually tell you of what we claim today we are. Yes, here it goes. Okay, so I used to go and speak a lot in the developed world, so both US and Europe. And generally people used to come and ask me, what's your vision? And because I never had a vision, I used to tell them very honestly, but I never had a vision. And people used to get very upset with me. So this year in January, we framed our vision, 17 years hence. So quite late, but it is. So the vision that we finally ended up framing is a vision that I will never achieve probably in my lifetime, but that's essentially probably what a vision is. So it's building business with and or for the other 3 billion. I'll start from this side. The other 3 billion, the world's population is roughly 7 billion. The top 1 billion is where 90% of the capital is serving them. Around 8% of the capital, so 98% of the capital is serving the top 4 billion, and roughly 2% is serving the bottom 3 billion. And these bottom 3 billion largely reside in Asia, Africa, and some part of Latin America. So almost 95% of this will reside there. We thought since the world and the trillions of dollars that exist in the world is interested in the first 4 billion, 3 billion is a very large number to make money out of. So we are only focused on the other 3 billion, that's the lower part of the so-called pyramid that exists in the demographics around the world. With and for, so you cannot make money from the people without engaging them in the act of creating money. So either they are going to consume what you produce, or they are going to produce what the rich will consume. And that's essentially what we try to do. We work with those who are part of the bottom to either create something that the rich will consume. And do you have any examples that poor produce that rich consume? Anybody? Yeah, so farm, produce, artisanal stuff, textile, dairy, anything. So most of these things are produced. And poor consume everything that you and I consume. So that's the second part of it. Business, I think the world has been trying for thousands of years, since the time Homo sapiens were called Homo sapiens, poverty has existed. And it has not been possible to remove poverty. Generally, what we have done is we have spent 98% of our energy trying to make money and 2% of energy to actually change the equation on poverty. If all our expertise is in generating money, then maybe the right way to change poverty is not by giving that 2% away to change poverty, but put all your best energy in doing it. So I thought maybe building businesses that actually engage poor in a very economic manner, rather than giving them doles or subsidies, is probably a better way of doing it. So build businesses that work with them. And then of course, building means you have to create a business, identify an entrepreneur, support, create groups of people who have to come together, take risks that capital normally will not take. So you have to go and do things which are quite extraordinary. So that's basically where our vision is. It has taken us a long period of time, but we were able to frame something that actually at least impresses, if not convinces, most of the Western world. So this is where we are today. I realize that to actually work with the low-income people, you can't just have one bullet solution. So I don't have a silver bullet. So we today actually have built an entire ecosystem. And I'll start from the bottom. We actually have a microfinance institution of our own, which roughly has 750,000 clients. We roughly are close to $300 million in assets. And these clients essentially are doing is basically borrowing $100 or $200 to sell vegetables, things that actually have a very high velocity of turnover. So you actually borrow $100, buy vegetables, go and sell it for $150, make $50 or $30 or $20, whatever extra, and return back that $100 for some small amount over a period of time. So that's essentially what it does. What you would realize is when you are doing microfinance, you are essentially actually working with poor people individually or at the maximum their family. That means their ability to create leverage in terms of impact and jobs is very limited. So if you are working with 750,000 enterprises, you are not going to impact more than maybe 1 million people. Which is a very low multiple. So 750,000 enterprises, maybe 1.2, 1.3 times in terms of real impact, job creation, etc. But it is still a very large outreach. And Professor Mohammad Yunus, who is the Nobel Peace Prize winner from Bangladesh, was the man who conceptualized the idea of creating social capital, which will allow people to not only lend but collect money. And that's what we are doing. So that was one part of it. The second part was, how do you deal with those who have graduated from poverty but are still on the borders? For example, people running small shops, small restaurants, shops, etc. They require very rapid working capital. And how do you do it without actually trying to put in a large number of people? So here you can use technology. If there are people who are using POS and their buyers are actually using credit cards, you can use the amount that they have done, because it's very difficult to get accounts. It's very difficult to actually get any which way where you can do lending to them. So you can use the sales that they have done and which has been recorded by a third party through a POS terminal and convert it into a lending amount so that their business can go on. The best thing here is you actually don't need too many feet of street. You can collect your money back. And similarly, we have actually different institutions. Ultimately, what we are doing is doing everything from $100 to roughly around $25 million internally within the group, providing all kinds of enterprises, every kind of capital to build different kinds of businesses, each making a positive impact. So Aavishkaar is the fund that I run. We are considered one of the pioneers in impact investing. Roughly we have invested $200 million in India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and we are now extending to East Africa. We are hoping to close another $200 million this year, which will all be invested largely in India. But the idea is to actually build enterprises, bottoms up, from zero level with no revenues, in areas where generally private equity or venture capital is not willing to go. So use technology to solve input problem for agriculture. I'll actually give you some examples as we move forward. But essentially, we build an entire ecosystem that is required to help any entrepreneur of any size and scale operating at any level to receive the kind of capital they want to. And to actually make that ecosystem, all this to function together, you need to look beyond capital. You need to build an ecosystem that works with each other. That means not only do you need to do these things, you have to attract and invite people who essentially are not necessarily fully aligned with you, could be your competitors, but you want them to operate in your area. So the more people operate with you, around you, in your area, chances are that you would be able to do it better. The more you have magic kinds of institutions who are trying to accelerate, incubate, you will be able to do your job better. And that's essentially what we do. We incubate, we celebrate, we organize, we convene, we bring in investors, our competitors, and we make an entire ecosystem function together. Ultimately, if you can look to us, we are actually trying to do things. One is, essentially, we have created, on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, actually, is what we have done ourselves. And on this side, what we have done is we have given money to other entrepreneurs to build businesses. If you look at this side, we have actually been largely providing capital in all shapes and forms. And on the right side, we are essentially helping entrepreneurs, giving them money to do education, healthcare, agriculture development, energy, anything that would create or mitigate the risks and vulnerability with the low-income population. And that's essentially really our model. Being entrepreneurial ourselves, as well as advocating and promoting entrepreneurs who are outside. So again, coming back to a little bit more specific on what we have done, and I'm trying to move a little fast so that we can do a little bit of an engagement later on, because I know this is too much to digest, so you will have lots of questions, or probably a lot of confusion of what this guy is actually talking about. So we believe that you need to bring knowledge, capital, and networks all together for you to create an ecosystem. The entity called IntelliCap that we created, which full name is Intellectual Capital, and that was part of my initial theory that you need both capital and talent. IntelliCap's idea was to actually attract the best of the talent from across the world and convince them to work in the area of impact. Now, it's easier said than done, and you need to actually have an inspiring theory behind it. So we came up with the theory that if you can bring your knowledge and if you can identify and support entrepreneurs in all possible way, by building an ecosystem around, you will be able to create significant value. We run a program called Sankalp, which is essentially nothing but a convening program where we do it in India, Indonesia, and East Africa. And what we do is get in investors, identify entrepreneurs, groom these entrepreneurs to be presentable enough that they talk in the language that the investors understand. Generally, if you will put 100 entrepreneurs and investors in one room, 50 entrepreneurs, 50 investors, the investors will come back, they couldn't find an entrepreneur, and the entrepreneurs will come back and say, there was no investor interested in me. And one of the reasons this happens is because while they speak the same language, in terms of vernacular languages, they would not be talking to them in the language that they understand. So the entrepreneur will be interested in what they want to do, and the investor is interested in the return that they are seeking, the security of their capital, the governance, etc. And therefore, they just never come together. How do you make the entrepreneur understand what the investor wants, and what is it that the investor need to understand before engaging with the entrepreneur, specifically when the entrepreneurs are not necessarily just building a new app, where the entrepreneur and the investor both understand each other quite well. But if you are trying to actually build a business that is more complex, is dealing with a social problem which is far more complex than any commercial problem, and yet trying to make money, you need to both understand and look beyond passion. So that's essentially what we are trying to do. And that's what Intellicap does. Arohan is a microfinance institution, and I'll tell you the story behind this company of why we actually chose to get into microfinance. In 2012, India had actually gone through a fairly serious crisis in microfinance, and this company, which was actually founded by somebody else, was actually closing down. It was shutting down very rapidly. It was losing $500,000 a month, and it was left with $1.5 million. It had an asset base of $25 million, and in 12 months' time, it has come down to $2 million. This company was, had we not intervened for another 3 months, it would have shut down. So we actually put in every penny of capital that we had, and this is all 2012, to buy this company. And it took us 45 days to turn it around. And that will tell you that sometimes when you start sinking, it is not necessarily because you do not know what to do. It is just the fear of failing makes you not to take any decisions. The fact that we could actually buy it for $2.5 million and turn it around in 45 days will tell you that there was nothing much we did except taking some very logical decisions that anybody else would have taken. Just that the company, its investors, were so frozen out of fear of failure that they were not taking very logical decisions. In last 4.5 years, we have grown this company 50 times. So we are right now at $300 odd million in assets, and we are taking it to an initial public offering so that we can actually create liquidity for some of the investors who have joined us. In the meantime, we have taken this company from serving 20,000 people to close to around 800,000 people. And that's essentially what you can do in case you have clarity of thought and you can build a business. We also realized when we were trying to help people build enterprises that if you, a lot of these entrepreneurs who are sitting here would be looking for equity when they are starting up, but once they have actually lost a significant amount of their ownership to a new investor, let's say you raise your first $1 million and you give away 40% of your company, you have very precious 60% left with you, and the chances are the next time you're giving away your million, seeking another $1 million, you may not want to take it as equity, specifically if you have ability to service cash flows. And what we realized is there is a large number of entrepreneurs actually were looking for something called venture debt. They were really looking for a cash flow based lending where the product needs to be designed without any collateral in a manner that it can be serviced. So for example, you have a client, like let's say government of India, government of Malaysia, and the government normally has a very long cycle to pay your dues. So let's say you sell something to the government, and instead of getting money back in 45 days, you get your money back in 9 months, 12 months, 15 months. How the hell do you survive? Now, if you take equity to survive, you are essentially losing very precious ownership of yours while trying to actually basically service working capital needs. If you go to a bank, the bank will say, oh, you don't make money, you're not profitable, we don't know when the government will return, you have to pay back on a monthly basis, and therefore, and also they will seek collateral which you don't have. It is important to actually have a product that understands that you don't have collateral. It is important to have a product that is willing to take the risk of you failing to return the money. And it is important to have a product that can customize and design looking at the cash flows that you have, a product so that your chances of success goes high. We set up a company called Intelligro based on our experiences of working with startup entrepreneurs. And this company today is roughly around $100 million in assets, has lent to around 150, 100 to around 200 odd what we call social businesses that are generally called medium and small scale businesses, not necessarily large businesses. This is our new experiment. We are actually trying to, one of the things we realized, a large number of people are actually not looking at $1 million, $500,000. A large number of very small businesses are looking for loans between $2,000 to $20,000. They are not necessarily looking for either $100 or looking for $500,000. Now, these kinds of entrepreneurs normally do not have great books of accounts. These kinds of entrepreneurs, you cannot spend significant amount of time understanding them, due diligencing them, etc., because the cost will become so high that you will never be able to give a loan. And one of the things that we came up with is, how do you actually use algorithms to understand the bank statements, etc., of the entrepreneurs so that you can increase the velocity in which you can lend. Because if you have to lend to hundreds of entrepreneurs on a daily basis, you cannot actually do it by doing a physical due diligence on each one of them. And Tribe essentially is a platform that allows any lender who wants to lend between $2,000 to $20,000 to individuals who are actually trying to run businesses but have very limited amount of information or data to provide. We are trying to use alternate data like data of their mobile phones. We are using artificial intelligence and algorithms to actually study the bank account statements and trying to see if there are anything wrong, just so that you understand different banks have different formats. And it's very difficult for anybody to use a software to read all kinds of formats from all kinds of banks. And that's essentially what this does, allows a lender to make large number of loans in a very short period of time, between $2,000 and $20,000. So then I'll actually come to what I have done as funds. This is the business that I run personally. There is a part of India called Orissa, which is considered to be one of the poorest part of India. It's in the eastern part of India. And Orissa used to actually have no dairy. So most of the milk that was needed by the people living in urban part of Orissa used to come from outside Orissa. One of the reasons why there was no dairies was, one, it is a poor state. Second, the local population does not really work, actually had a lot of cows. So there was not much milk. If you look at it from a risk point of view, therefore, no logical investor will actually go and invest in Orissa. First, which is a faraway state. It is not a Mumbai or Delhi, so it's not a place where normally capital will go. And it is also a state where you don't have much milk. So therefore, setting up a dairy is high-risk business. But if you look at it on the contrarian side, you go into a state which doesn't have much milk, and you actually work with the farmers to produce significant amount of milk, then you can create a dairy that has almost a monopoly on the front end side. And that's the risk we took. We identified an entrepreneur, invested $1 million, and took the risk of building the back end. We have been able to scale this business to around $40 million in last 5 years, just by taking that risk and building a fairly significant brand in a state that people thought there is not much opportunities. Technology can play a huge role in trying to help farmers deal with the challenges that they are facing today. One of the biggest challenges farmers face today is how do you reduce your input cost? Because of the huge desire to increase productivity, there is a massive focus on putting in more fertilizers. If you put in more fertilizers, you actually will have more pests coming to you, and therefore you will put in more pesticides, essentially leading to fairly significant challenges of high costs. And when you actually go to the market and sell your produce, chances are, if there is a bumper crop, all the farmers are selling tomatoes at the same time, the price drop. So it's very, very critical for farmers to find a way to reduce the input cost. And the challenges at the input side is, when the rain comes, all the farmer want to buy. And again, the seeds are not available, or spurious seeds, or seeds which are not really going to germinate, are being sold. And so the farmer is always taken for granted and loses a lot. AgroStar essentially uses mobile phones, allows the farmer an opportunity by making a missed call. So the farmer just makes a call and disconnects. This company calls the farmer back, asks what do you want, and delivers whatever they want at their doorstep wherever they are in the villages. And this is done at a much lower rate than what the farmer will gain buying the same things from the nearby shop, the retail shop. And that essentially is the beauty of technology. Most of us benefit from this technology by buying things over Amazon in India and Flipkart as well. But a farmer is probably, unfortunately, not privileged enough to take those advantages. We have been trying to create the same infrastructure and same arbitrage for the farmers. My guess is Malaysia might also be facing the same challenge that India faces. We have a massive challenge of waste. We produce so much waste these days with the change in the way our lifestyles are being lived. We thought about looking for people who are trying to create businesses around waste. And we met these two young guys who were trying to actually build around dry waste. We invested $500,000 in them. They tried to scale their business, and then there was a fire, and the whole business got burnt out. What we realized in those 6 months where we had invested $500,000 with these two gentlemen is that building a scalable business in the area of waste cannot be done by just human intervention. And therefore, we went back to them despite the fire, which actually burnt out the whole factory, largely run by individuals, hundreds of people working there, and worked with them and asked them, how do you actually scale this business up? They were doing a ton a day, and we wanted them to go to 100 tons a day. How do you go from 1 ton a day to 100 tons a day? And they came back to us. So just so that you know that if you have different kinds of plastics, those plastics actually have different colors, different weights, and different values. And you need to actually segregate them. And there is a special community in India that can actually, by looking at a plastic, can segregate them by physical hand. Unfortunately, this only comes from one village, and therefore they are very specialized. How do you replicate them? How do you scale them? Was an impossible target. Machines can do that, though. So these guys then figured out that optical refractors can do this at 300 times faster than a human can. Only problem is an optical refractor costs you $1 million each. And we essentially went ahead, put in that amount of money, and we bought multiple optical refractors, and now this company is doing $7 million of waste processing on an annual basis, growing at 100% year on year, is the largest waste processing company in India. And it has just taken us 3.5 years from the time that fire happened to reach here. Connect India is actually, again, a very simple theory. How do you let people living in rural India benefit from the arbitrage of e-commerce? E-commerce is creating a lot of value for people living in urban India. How do you take that to rural India? So if you go to Amazon and ask, if you try to purchase something, you essentially get onto the Amazon this thing, they will ask you for your PIN code. And if your PIN code is not there in their list, then you cannot buy, simply because Amazon cannot deliver where you are. And they cannot deliver anything 30 kilometers outside any large city in India. So if you are 30 kilometers away from a city, you will not have any e-commerce delivery coming to you. Connect India is basically trying to solve the same problem. It is actually using an entire network of kiosks to create local entrepreneurs who are willing to deliver, and therefore open up new PIN codes for Amazon and Flipkart and anybody else that's operating. What you do creates significant jobs in the process, because each delivery person is a new job. And you are riding on the massive billions of dollars of investment that e-commerce is driving to create jobs in rural India. And at the same time, those in rural India who are trying to consume, also coming in as a new consumer for the same facility. And finally, and this is just an example of what you can do, a person who had never done microfinance comes with a completely different way of thinking about microfinance, valuing every part of the supply chain of disbursing loan, coming with a business plan which none of us ever believed could be delivered. But once that belief was there, because this person did not know it cannot be done, I invested a $1.5 million in 2009 in this company, and this company IPO'd at more than $1 billion in 6 years' time in microfinance, which is actually a very linear business. It's a very difficult business to scale. You are working with very poor people, but went from 0 to $1 billion in market capitalization in 7 years' time, 6.5, 7 years' time. Got listed, we made 10 times money, made massive impact. And the funny part about this company is it doesn't do just microfinance. It provides education, it provides food to all its customers. So 2 million people, their children getting educated, each one of them actually getting whatever food they want, packaged at 20% discount to whatever the market has to offer, in addition to microfinance. And that's the kind of entrepreneurs that the world will allow you, that can change the world in case you give them an opportunity to build scale. And that's what we have been trying to do. So I'll end here. I think that's probably my last slide. Yeah. I mean, I can actually talk about our impact. We have invested in large number of companies. We have invested in 50 companies which didn't exist actually. So we were the first investors. Most of these companies were zero revenue companies. An individual with an idea or a plan. We put in money ranging from $1 million to $5 million. And most of these companies have scaled up significantly, creating significant jobs and significant outreach. When we look at impact, we look at it in two different ways. How many jobs did we create? Essentially, how many people actually have been impacted, how many lives touched, how many jobs created. And the second part is how many people's risks did you reduce? How many people got educated? How many people who could never access health could actually access health care, et cetera, et cetera. So how many vulnerabilities did you reduce? The numbers are reasonably large. We have roughly created 225,000 jobs in last 17 years. So in one way, it doesn't look that large, but the fact that I started with $100 and we have come this far, it'll tell you that if a person with $100 and not much experience can create 225,000 jobs, India needs 1 million jobs a month actually. So 5 people like me, actually 60 people like me can serve India, which is 1.3 billion people. So that essentially is potentially possible. We were able to actually reduce significantly on the carbon emissions by actually promoting companies that were more energy efficient. This is actually the economic leverage. The 120 odd million dollars that I invested in India has been followed in by $572 million of investments by other people into the companies that we invested in. And that's the kind of leverage that we created on the economic side. So I'll stop here, and I have tried to move fast partly because I know there's too much to digest. But if you have specific questions on anything, or even on my own journey, I will be happy to talk about that.
All right. First of all, I have to congratulate you, Mr. Vineet. That was quite inspiring. Okay. So I would like to know the initial challenges. Like, for example, did you get government support, when you started this entrepreneurship? Okay. I think thereafter it just took off from there. And the source is very important, and this is something which I come from a university, so one of my agenda teaching entrepreneurship this semester is looking into rural entrepreneurship, which I believe provide a much stable landscape. Okay, so and I'm also, whenever I go to rural region, one issue which nobody has somehow found a solution to is waste management. Yes. Okay, so I think India faced the same thing. It's like, so I'm saying, so how did you get this so-called urban entrepreneur, or even an entrepreneur who is interested to go into a rural region and invest? Must it come from that region? That's the other question. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, as I actually said, this is actually the problem statement for you. Just imagine yourself, this is actually my end state. So what I presented is where I am today. If I take you back to 2001 and put you $100 in your pocket and ask you to actually construct this, what will you do? My first answer to you is, I had zero support from any government institution. I never knew how to approach the government. So the funny part was, I had no clue where to find money. I had no clue what finance was. I had no idea how a venture capital runs. I was just too naive. I had no understanding of these things. I can actually give you a brief on my own history. So once I quit my job and went home, so my wife said, do you know we have to pay rent? And my son is getting 3 years old, so he has to go to school. And do you know how much is the school fees? And that was my first big shock. I realized I have taken a very brave decision, but probably it's a very stupid decision as well, because I neither had the background nor the money to actually do it. I think, and you'll be surprised actually, I had never traveled out of India till 2001. I had never seen how the world looked from outside. So in 2001, after taking this decision, I got a little lucky because a gentleman on my board used to run India's first venture capital fund. When I quit, that person called me and said, have you gone mad? Do you really know what venture capital is? I said, no, I don't, but I want to set up India's first venture capital fund that focuses on rural India. And he said, man, you will die. So I said, well, you are there to help me. So this person introduced me to a chartered accountant who also first pulled his hair out, saying, Bagar, you don't have money and you want to give money to others. But he helped me register, without charging anything, a fund. Because I did not know how to register a fund. But this chartered accountant helped me register a fund, didn't charge me a penny, let my $100 stay in my pocket, but gave me a fund. Then I actually started looking for how do rich people look like, because I had never seen them. And then some of those, as I said, I was working in that management institution. Some of the people in that management institution actually heard about my idea and talked to their peers working in Singapore. And those folks in Singapore were basically Indians, mid-career banking Indians. So somebody was a director in Credit Suisse, somebody was in Standard Chartered, etc. These guys used to get a lot of requests to give $50, $100 away as charity. They first time heard of somebody trying to set up a venture capital fund to change India. They found it very amusing. I think they found it very cute also. Not necessarily were very impressed by me. They thought this sounds like a very crazy idea. So some of these guys got in touch with me and said, why don't you come to Singapore? I said, well, boss, I don't even know how to fly to Singapore. And nor I have $100, and the ticket, I think, if I remember correctly, was $400 to and fro to Singapore, India. So these 7 guys actually paid for that $400, gave me a ticket, and I flew down to Singapore, 2001, April, I think. And these people called a lot of Indians, and there are some others, Singaporeans and Chinese and Vietnamese also were in that room. I made whatever presentation I made. This is all 2001. I don't think so I made much sense, because these were all bankers, so they knew their word. I had no clue what I was saying. Long and short of it, one person at the end of it, his name is Jayesh Parekh. He lives in Singapore, even still lives in Singapore. He stood up and actually asked everybody, so do you guys want to support this guy? And I am willing to sign $10,000 to give it to him. And that room collected $100,000 in terms of verbal commitment. And then they asked me, so how will you take this money back? And I had no clue. So because they were bankers, they told me, listen, guy, there is something called Foreign Exchange Management Act. So are you going to take the money in the sack? They will catch you and put you behind bars. If you put it in the bank account, you have to figure out how to return it back. Long and short of it is that with the $100,000, I got the confidence enough to spend next 9 months trying to study Indian law, Singaporean law, Mauritian law, because when I went to a law firm, they charged me $100,000 for telling me how to bring the money. But I had only $100,000. So if I bring it back and give it to this law firm, then I was back to zero. So I became a lawyer because I had no choices. And that's essentially what entrepreneurship is all about. When your back is to the wall and the money that you have in your pocket is all going to go to the lawyers, then you realize as an entrepreneur, you are the one who sweep the floor and you are the one who make the sales. Anybody who is an entrepreneur has to realize if you can't do things on your own, chances are you will not be around. I think the second thing that made me survive was while I was willing to do this, I was a born optimist. I actually saw no challenges. In fact, a lot of people 8, 9 years later asked me, did you ever feel you will go bankrupt? Actually, it never occurred to me. I was so convinced that I will actually raise the money that the idea that I will fail actually never occurred to me all through. And those 2, 3 things, and the third probably thing is that because I was so convinced about my success, a lot of very experienced people who were very convinced I will fail actually decided to support me. They knew that this guy will fail, but they thought that if he's so convinced, he might succeed. And I was supported by a large number of people who later told me, we never thought you will survive. We thought you will run away in 6 months, we thought you will run away in 2 years, you thought you will run away in 4 years. But small successes, each small successes sent a big message to me. It was a big positive for me. Again, remember, because I was coming from nowhere, for me, every small success was a big success. And I have seen a large number of people run away, even though they get a lot of success, because their expectation is so high, that mismatch of expectation makes them feel that they are not achieving enough. And that's actually one of the biggest negatives for entrepreneurs. If you go with zero expectations, you will always be happy, and you will always feel you have done better than what you expected. If you go with a very large expectation of building the next Facebook, chances are you won't even have a small company running for yourself. So that's essentially my story.
What about the initial sources of support? So you have highlighted the importance of networking. So my last question was, the types of entrepreneurs that believe in you and who are willing to invest in this rural area. Do they come from big companies, first of all? It's like the technology, the entrepreneurship, or they come from individual? And where are they from? From the same region or outside?
Yeah, so I think, like as you rightly said, I started with the belief that there are a lot of small people operating in these villages who understand the local context better and should be the entrepreneurs. That's how I started. After my first 6 investments, all my 6 investments were going bankrupt simultaneously. So I have not told you all the negative things about it. This is 2005. I had invested, my 100,000 had actually become half a million. And my 6 investments, all totaling up to 150,000, were all going bankrupt simultaneously because none of the good guys I had invested my money in, who all were inclined to change the lives of the poor people, know how to do business. So they were so focused on changing the lives of the people that they were screwing their lives and my life together along with it. So in 2005, I wrote a note to myself. No more working for people who are trying to do good for others. I will only work with people who are trying to do good for themselves. In the process, you should do the good for others. Again, very basic principle in entrepreneurship. Your survival is very critical. So becoming a martyr will not get you any medals. You will just become history in your own home. And I learned it very quickly. By 2005, I had realized all these good souls who are trying to change the world are very important people. Venture capital, where I have to give money, make them successful and take money out, is not for them. They are fit for charity, not for something which is accountable, where you have to return the capital and you have to find ways of working with them. So over a period of time, first I moved from good people. I was a good guy investing in good people. 2, I was not a good guy anymore. I was actually really asking tough questions. Giving money to people who wanted to be entrepreneurs, willing to take risk, were definitely showing grit, had the ability to live with the grime of running a daily business, which has all kind of negativity associated with it, and willing to fight it out. Ultimately, if the person doesn't have the capability and the grit to fight it out till the last day, I am not going to get my money back. And he or she, if he is from a large corporate, chances are will quit within 6 months and go back to the large corporate. Doesn't care about me. So it's not really about large corporate or small corporate. Doesn't mean you have to come from rural India or urban India. It doesn't matter you come from Silicon Valley or from Kuala Lumpur. Till the time your commitment is to your business, and you can demonstrate that by doing things with or without my money, you are the man I want to, or man or woman I want to support. And that's essentially the philosophy.
So basically you're saying this entrepreneur comes to you. And
it's both, it's 3 ways. So we actually invest in 3 different ways. We basically sometimes take a position, for example, that Orissa story. I wanted to invest in a dairy in Orissa. There was an entrepreneur who wanted to do something in some other place. The entrepreneur connected with me. I convinced the entrepreneur to move to the state, and the entrepreneur and convinced him to do the dairy and gave him the capital. But the entrepreneur did everything else. In some cases, the entrepreneur had no clue what they wanted to do. We felt this group of people have the capability to do something. And then we convinced them, gave them the money, and helped them how to build a business. And they gave the grit, grime, and everything else. Then the waste management guy actually wanted to do waste management. They were very clear they will do waste management, they will not work with the government, and we were looking for the same space. And we were able to actually help them scale up. And then the third is where the person already knew everything. Like the microfinance guy who went for IPO. They had the plan, they had the understanding, they had the experience. The only thing they wanted a supportive investor. My role was very marginal. When you find an entrepreneur of that quality, who already knows everything, you will make a 15x return. In others, you will make 2x, 0x, 5x, depending on where you go. It is rare to find that quality of an entrepreneur. If you find a lot of them, then you will become very rich, as well as make a difference. Very rare to find such entrepreneurs, but all the three things happen.
Can I ask you another secret? Where do you find all these entrepreneurs from universities, or somebody introduced them to you, or whatever?
Yeah, no, see, remember that I talked about the ecosystem? So when I started in 2001, I actually realized that there are very few people doing the kind of work in which I was willing to invest. And that's why I had 6 failures back to back, because there were very few people. So whether I like it or not, I had to give them the money. To actually create competition and to get the best out of it, you need to build an entire ecosystem. We started the idea of Sankalp, which is very much like this. You actually bring in people from all across. You attract talent, India, Silicon Valley, wherever, whosoever. You actually showcase them. You bring in investors. Without competition, I wouldn't have been successful. Till 2007, we were the only guys investing in India. And I used to boast very proudly to everybody, I am the only guy. And then somebody told me, you're an idiot. If you're the only guy, then you must be doing something very stupid. If you are doing anything intelligent, there will be 100 other people. So, and that struck me, and between 2007 and 2017, I can tell you there are 50 such investors like Aavishkaar in India. And that's our achievement. It's a great achievement for us to have created significant competition. So ultimately, without having an ecosystem where I can go in and somebody can follow me, and there is an entrepreneur and a better entrepreneur chasing it down, you will not be successful. It is never about individuals. So I am not important. The whole ecosystem is important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody want? Yeah. Yeah, so you can actually, I can connect you to the team that is working on it, but essentially the whole idea is, how do you actually offer? So lending is one of the oldest businesses in the world, so everybody is lending. The big challenge that is emerging for banks today is fintech businesses are completely disintermediating the banks. The banks only have bulk left with them. The smartness, the speed, everything else is going outside. More so with blockchain coming in, a lot of banking processes would actually become redundant. So a lot of people will just become redundant. The banks, therefore, wants to figure out how do you do things. Now, within those, there are different slivers. So if you are trying to do a certain kind of business, let's say you're trying to lend between 2,000 and 20,000, very specific thing. A bank will want to lend from 100,000 to $100 million. And chances are they will be least interested in doing a $100,000 loan. So the bank is not interested in lending $10,000, $20,000 because they have a very large balance sheet. But if you know that there is a big demand for $2,000 and $20,000, and where will this demand come from? It will come from people who are struggling to get money, who do not have collaterals to offer. Now, the big challenge is, how do you process hundreds and thousands of such applications? That's really the challenge. The challenge is, how do you take decisions? Because if I try to ask you 500 questions, I try to go to you, see whether you have a home, whether you have a business, the cost of doing the due diligence might be $20,000. So if I give you $20,000, then I have already spent that $25,000 in giving you. Any amount of interest will not make money for me. So I need to find a way where I can do a due diligence while I'm giving you a $2,000 or a $20,000 loan in 1 or 2% of that amount. That cannot be done by human. So what is it, the information that you will provide me? Now, as everybody says, the data trail that we have produced in last 10 years is more than the entire humanity. Entire 50,000 years of our existence, or last 3 years probably. Now that amount of data that you're producing is leaving a trail that can actually be utilized to make a judgment on your behavior. And there are different people. Somebody is actually making a judgment on your Facebook profile, somebody is using something else. But using your phone and using your, so for example, if you have a bank account and you can submit your bank account, the problem is if you're dealing with 10,000 people, they will have 500 different bank accounts and 500 different banks. All banks have different formats to produce the banking statement. How does an algorithm read and make sense out of those banking statements and help you make a decision is where the challenge lies. And that's essentially what these guys in Tribe are doing. So it's a very specific challenge. Here.
One of the company that you mentioned just now, you were telling that, I forgot what was the name. It started to bleed certain amount of money every month, and then you came in.
Arvan.
Yeah, and then you came in with intervention, and within 45 days it improved. What was your intervention? Is it just financial, or was there strategy? If it was strategy, what is it?
Yeah, I think money was actually important, but it was not a decision-making change, because 45 days money cannot bring about that change. I think the big thing was that, I'll tell you the background. What has happened was in 2010 in India, there was a crisis that happened in the space of microfinance. A state in India called Andhra Pradesh actually effectively issued a warning to all the people who have borrowed microfinance, saying that, hey guys, you don't need to return the money. The government actually told the people not to return the money. So $3 billion were overnight, 18th October 2010, $3 billion suddenly vanished. Because every poor person said, hey, government just told me this is my money. You can't take it back. The government's order was very interesting. It said, as a microfinance institution, you can give money to the person, but you can't ask the person to return. The person may decide to return and may come voluntarily to your home and return it, but you can't go to their home. Of course, if nobody comes to you and you can voluntarily return, nobody returns. So $3 billion went away. Now this institution, Arohan, had nothing to do with Andhra Pradesh. It was sitting in north of India, in Calcutta, where as far away as possible, as far away as India is from Malaysia. But the CEO and the management of this institution did not realize that the fear that the banks, who are actually the one who lend to microfinance institution, will make them not lend to any microfinance institution anywhere in India. So the problem was somewhere else. So you had diabetes, but I was dying. Now that was the problem. And these guys were not able to comprehend. So instead of actually cutting down and limiting their risk, they were investing money in expanding, when the banks had reduced or actually stopped giving any money to them. And basically, when they realized there no money was coming, they just froze. There was no decision-making taking place, because the idea that they will not receive money never occurred to them. As entrepreneurs, they never thought, so as we say, rising tide lift all boats. Sometime when a lot of money is flowing, everybody is making money. So when tide turned, these guys were not prepared to turn around along with it. And essentially, when we went in, we realized that first and foremost, you have to actually shut down some branches, which means you have to take tough decisions. You have to let go people, cut employees. Not necessarily the most interesting thing you want to do. But if you don't do it, you won't survive. That's actually the first part of it. The second part of it is they had given money as processing fee to banks, but the banks had not given them loan. So you have $100,000 lying with a bank who had sanctioned money but not released it to you. Now you should have gone and collected it back. So we did this very simple thing. We basically looked at all the accounts, followed through, did all the dirty thing, went and collected the money back, and lo and behold, in 45 days we were profitable. So nothing very intelligent, nothing path-breaking, simple, basic stuff, day in, day out. Any other questions? Yes, sir. I would not really be, so I think the data in India, I don't know if you know about Aadhaar, the unique identification code that India has developed. So we are the only country in the world where roughly 1.1 billion people can be identified by one number. That's the world's largest database ever. It's considered to be the world's most audacious exercise because I think in 2 years, every Indian has its iris code, has its thumbprint, all on one database. All of us, our mobile phones, our income tax, our bank accounts, all are connected to that one number. So today in India, if you want to actually not pay income tax, you are in deep trouble. Because the government on one back can actually find out what bank accounts you have, how much money you have, and how much tax you should be paying and why are you not paying it. It has never happened in India's history, and I don't think so, based on whatever little I know, any country in the world has a database of this size, this depth, and this capability. So in India, the data trails are actually coming together. We also have some very unique government-driven apps that have come through. I don't know if you know this, but Government of India has been able to use its own technology team to come up with an interface called UPI that essentially completely decimates Visa and MasterCard. So Visa and MasterCard are no more making money in India because the UPI actually it's a free database. Government just made it and gave it free to anybody. So it's unified payment interface. And the government made it and made it free. So basically Visa and MasterCard, who were essentially along with American Express was the three interfaces, actually are struggling to survive. So these are things, now these are very audacious things. So in India right now, there are some very audacious, some can call them foolhardy also. We also were the only country in the world who decided to withdraw 87% of our currency on one day. So nobody else would have probably ever imagined to do that. In a country of 1.3 billion, we removed 87% of the currency on one day. Gone. So we've done quite magical stuff. Some of it not so pleasant, but in case there are no more questions, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vineet. Thank you for all participants. But before you leave, just to remind you on, filling up the survey form. And we're going to have another session at this room at 4:30. It's by Jenna De Wilde, User Journey Mapping. So hope to see you guys soon, yeah? Thank you.